Okay, so welcome to the webinar. My name is Mimi Rosenfeld. I'm one of the trainers and course designers with PMO Advisory. And today we're going to talk about a subject that's very dear to my heart, which is knowledge management. That should make sense since I'm a trainer. I like knowledge. I'm also a project manager, so I like managing. So it all comes together in this topic. Manage project knowledge. What, how, why. First, I'm going to give you a little preface, which is this is a new process in the PMI project management framework. In the publicity for this presentation, we promised a deep dive into the process. And as I was preparing the presentation, I learned myself more and more just how deep it can go. And I debated with myself, how much detail should I give? And since I love knowledge and I love learning, I decided let's just go with it and open up the faucets for all the information that's available. So this will be a very dense presentation, and it was also prepared for other training situations that are available through PMO Advisory. We do offer a variety of different courses, and that includes certifications such as the PMP. So I hope this will spur your interest. So let's take the first step into the dive. Project management. Manage project knowledge. What, how, why. So this is our agenda. What? We'll understand why manage project knowledge was added as a process and what is its importance. And we'll also talk a lot about all the different kinds of knowledge that are generated by projects. How? This is basically the standard PMI feature of tools and techniques, and we'll look specifically at how to use tools and techniques for knowledge management. And we'll create outputs that document the project knowledge gained throughout the course of a project. Why? This is the benefits that are received by the project. And one of those benefits, one of the important outputs of a project are the knowledge that is gained. And this comes from the participation of all of the team members on the project. So we want to encourage that collaboration. And we want to take it to another level, which is saying that it's not just the people who are learning, but it's the organization that is learning. And this is a concept called organizational learning. And we'll talk about that towards the end of today's presentation. So let's start with the what. So manage project knowledge is a process. It's one of the new processes that was added with the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide. It is in the integration knowledge area, so you know that it has broad influence and applicability across the entire framework. And it's in the executing process group. So we know that there's going to be specific activity that takes place during the work, which is the bulk of the project. The definition of this process is: manage project knowledge is the process of using existing knowledge and creating new knowledge to achieve the project's objectives and contribute to organizational learning. So we see existing knowledge, the inputs, creating new knowledge, the outputs, and we see the concept of organizational learning. So this is really a lot about collaboration. So this process highlights the sort of duality in project management. We frequently talk about that it's a mix of science and art. And this is reflected in the types of knowledge that take place during a project. Explicit knowledge is science, and tacit knowledge is more art. But remember that projects always create knowledge. And one of the deliverables of a project is knowledge. This takes place throughout the project. So this is going to be one of the processes that's very iterative and repeated over and over again throughout the project. So we want to start with the available knowledge, and through the activity, the analysis, and the collaboration on the project team, we're going to transform that knowledge and create new knowledge. And that knowledge, in turn, can be used to transform future projects and even the organization as a whole. This means that project knowledge is very closely related to certain key concepts and values of project management. And these are progressive elaboration, process improvement, and continuous improvement. And these apply to the current project, future projects, and the organization as a whole. The knowledge gained during a project is primarily captured in the form of lessons learned. So each project will have a lessons learned register, and the register for each project will be filed in a lessons learned repository. The project archives will also be filed, and now this information from a particular project becomes part of the organizational process assets available for future reference on projects and other operations and activities of the organization. So again, throughout the project lifecycle, we are going to be adding to knowledge and developing lessons learned. There are two types of knowledge, as we mentioned: explicit and tacit. Explicit knowledge is what people normally think of as knowledge. As I said, this is part of the science dimension. So this is knowledge that can easily be classified and documented using language, numbers, and images. This is the information that goes into your project management plans, documents. It shows up in charts, graphs. You can put it in audio and video recordings. It's part of your databases. It's captured in all different kinds of media. This is the information that is easiest to communicate and transmit, as well as store, whether in digital or hard copy form. And it also makes it very easy to access. So it can be accessed in real time. For example, this webinar is presenting information that you are hearing in real time, but we're also recording it, so you'll have access to it at a later date. This is one of the features of explicit knowledge. What about tacit knowledge? This is often overlooked, but it's very important because it contributes a great deal to the experience and the underlying motivation of projects and team members and other stakeholders. So tacit knowledge is your personal experience, your opinions, your know-how, your beliefs, your insights. So these are things that you know, and you know them so well that you're not even aware that you know them. And you might not even believe that they're valuable to other people, but they are. Now, some examples to make the concept of tacit knowledge clearer are physical skills. So you could try to Google how to play a piano, but you're not going to learn how to play a piano unless you sit down in front of a piano and put your fingers on the keys and gradually learn how to read the music, how to move your fingers, how to use the piano pedals. So it's beyond that kind of conscious knowledge, explicit knowledge, and it is based on your personal experience and also on your interpersonal interactions. Because one of the most important ways to learn tacit knowledge is from your interaction with other people. So conversations are going to give you tacit knowledge. It could be a combination of explicit and tacit, but just being face-to-face with the person, you will learn a lot just by how they're saying it. So language is not always the best way to convey tacit knowledge. It really depends on that interaction, face-to-face contact, observation, imitation, and practice. So tacit knowledge depends on interpersonal relationships. And techniques that highlight this kind of knowledge transfer are mentoring and coaching. So now, what is knowledge management? So it is using existing knowledge and systems in order to create and communicate new knowledge. The accumulation of all of the knowledge, both explicit and tacit, is called intellectual capital. This level of information helps organizations improve their performance, gain a competitive advantage, and generate innovations. Another dimension of knowledge management is knowledge sharing. So communicating the knowledge. It can either be communicated as explicit through a variety of media or tacit through interpersonal contacts. And a particular technique for knowledge sharing are communities of practice. These are groups of people with shared interests. And the community of practice gives them a setting in which to share this information. And again, it could be either face-to-face or digital. For example, PMI has a knowledge management subsidiary called projectmanagement.com. And they offer actually many webinars as well as white papers. And they are organized based on communities of practice. So this is an excellent method for professional development. And then finally, another dimension of knowledge management is knowledge integration, where you synthesize the information from different disciplines and contexts. Remember, the process manage project knowledge is in the integration knowledge area. So integration is an important part of the knowledge management. I'll just quickly touch on some of the traditional, well-known inputs from the PMI framework. We have our enterprise environmental factors. These are inputs that are beyond the control of the project. They could either be external or internal. And the important thing to realize is that they include both explicit and tacit knowledge. For example, organizational culture is tacit knowledge. The other types of enterprise environmental factors on this list are explicit knowledge. We also have the organizational process assets. These are internal to the project, and they consist primarily of explicit knowledge that can be documented, accessed, and is very objective. The primary output of this process are the lessons learned. And many other processes in the PMI framework generate lessons learned. So if you take all of the issues, the challenges, the problems, the solutions, the risks, the situations, and what was their impact? How did you solve them? What were the recommendations? What kinds of plans and documents did we create and consult during the activity of the project? There you have the lessons learned register. And this is an output that's created in collaboration by all of the team members. It consists primarily of explicit knowledge, but because it is collaborative and it reflects the entire life cycle of the project, it can also be an opportunity to try to capture the tacit knowledge as well and transfer that. The lessons learned becomes an input to your same project in its later phases, as well as to future projects. At the end of the project, you finalize the lessons learned register and you archive it in the lessons learned repository. So the lessons learned are a bridge between past and future projects and between individual projects and the larger organization and organizational learning. So what knowledge do you arrive at during a project? All of this. So I'm not going to go into detail. As I said, part of what I want to show is the scope of the discipline of knowledge management. So just looking at it through the lens of project management, we have information that comes up in every different process group and throughout the project. So these should be very familiar as the project management plans and documents and reports generated in the course of a project. Okay, next we're going to move on to how. These are the tools and techniques. And I just briefly want to talk about the image that I use here to represent knowledge transfer. So yes, it's information. It's between two different people, but it's not just copying data from one database to another database. Because remember, it includes explicit and tacit knowledge. So it's really more like the Vulcan mind meld. So I don't know how many of you are Star Trek fans, but in the Vulcan mind meld, the Vulcan puts the hands directly on another person's head, and they now have complete knowledge of all of the information, thoughts, experiences, and emotions of the other person. So it is a hands-on, literally hands-on method of sharing both explicit and tacit knowledge. So let's see how we can do this during a project without being Vulcans. So there are a couple of approaches. There's the approach in the PMBOK guide, and this consists of the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs that define each process. So the inputs are knowledge from other or previous processes. The tools and techniques are going to be methods that are specific to this process, and the outputs are going to be the lessons learned. All of the types of knowledge described in the PMBOK as part of Managed Project Knowledge are explicit knowledge. There are many other approaches to knowledge management. And this is actually typical of project management because project management integrates many other disciplines and fields of organizational study and business administration. If you take any single topic, you can go deep into more detail. Each one of the inputs, tools, and techniques or outputs from any single process is a whole huge area of discipline, practice, and research. And that's true of knowledge management as well. So to complement the PMI approach, I'd like to use another approach that looks at knowledge from three perspectives: technological, organizational, and ecological. So the technical is exactly what you expect. It uses technology in order to store and access the information. And this is primarily explicit knowledge. With organizational knowledge, now you are combining different structures and sources of information, and collaboration and interpersonal skills become important in the development and transmission of that knowledge. So here we have both explicit and tacit knowledge. If we take that to an even higher level, now we're combining organizations and looking at more complexity. We have the equivalent of an ecosystem consisting purely of knowledge. And this ecosystem has both explicit and tacit knowledge. So stepping back for a moment to look at the PMI perspective, as our inputs, we have the project management plan and other documents from planning. During direct and managed project work, we get more information, such as the work performance data and the deliverables. Direct and managed project work, by the way, is another integration process, and it's also in the executing process group, just like managed project knowledge. Then this process applies its own tools and techniques that enhance the knowledge in inputs such as lessons learned and updates to the project management plan. But basically, if you look at this process, the inputs are knowledge, the tools and techniques are knowledge, and the outputs are knowledge. It's all knowledge 100%. And remember that it also is based on interpersonal skills and collaboration. So this process has an implicit or tacit relationship with other processes in the PMI framework that are also based on soft skills and that are also highly iterative. So these are in the knowledge areas of integration, resource, communications, and stakeholder management, as well as process groups of monitoring and controlling and closing. Okay, taking the complementary perspective, if we look at technological approaches, it's very easy to see how they relate directly to explicit knowledge. Because when we're talking about technology, we're often talking about data. And it's very objective, it's reproducible, it's communicable, and it can be stored, and it can be accessed at any time. So on this list, you'll see many that are using computer and internet and cloud computing technologies, but there are also some low-tech methods like user manuals, library services and books, print publications. And at the highest level, if you want to think about the technology approach, we have standards like ISO and ANSI. The organizational approaches introduce collaboration and interpersonal skills. One of the most common techniques across all of the PMI framework is expert knowledge. And it's important to point out that expert knowledge is itself a form of collaboration. And expert knowledge is a combination of explicit and tacit information. The method for gaining expert knowledge is actually similar to the methods for sharing all knowledge. It's based on interpersonal interactions. So the most common form are meetings, and many of these methods on the list are really just specialized forms of meetings. They can be face-to-face or virtual. So face-to-face, you get all of that information from being directly with a person. You can read the expressions on their face, you can read their body language, just the setting of where you're talking. Is it in a conference room? Is it in a coffee shop? That context adds tacit information. So in-person meetings give you the most information. Virtual meetings give you the next best information. And other kinds of digital contact, like this webinar, give progressively less information. I just want to point out a couple of items on this list. For example, storytelling and creativity workshops. These used to be dedicated to purely creative industries like entertainment and advertising, but they're becoming more common in other areas of business. And this reflects the rise of agile methodologies. And in addition, the best way to capture both tacit and explicit information in an organizational approach is through mentoring and coaching. Now we get to the higher, more complex level where we're combining both the technological and the organizational techniques. So we're looking at both explicit and tacit information. The top of the list is more of the explicit information from technological approaches. The middle of the list is more about interpersonal skills and collaboration that can generate both explicit and tacit information. And at the bottom of this list, we have higher level, more intangible kinds of knowledge. A lot of these would be considered as dimensions of leadership skills, such as political awareness, cultural awareness, and organizational learning. So now we get to why are we doing this? So the why are the outputs. These are the benefits. So what are the benefits of project knowledge management? Again, we can categorize things. So Project management loves analysis. It loves to break things down. So we're going to continue to do this, and you're going to see that there is a theme. Even though we're sometimes using slightly different wording, the three levels are fairly consistent. So first, knowledge management takes place at the individual level. And this would mean what is the career development and personal growth that's available to the project manager and each of the project team members. Then we're coming to a higher level, the team level. So this could be the project team. It could be multiple projects, for example, a program or a portfolio. And it could also be reflected in knowledge for individual departments and functions within the organization. And this is important to keep in mind because most organizations continue to be matrix organizations where departments and divisions have a lot of power and influence. And they need knowledge too. The highest level is organizational. And here we could be talking about within a single organization or across multiple organizations. For example, there are often professional associations that reflect the needs and interests of different organizations in the same discipline or industry. But it could be even more complex than that. So it could be interdisciplinary kinds of organizations. And the more complexity you have, the more combinations of systems you arrive at, you come to the point where it's best described as an ecosystem. So at the organizational level, a single organization will have its own culture. That's the way that people work together, what kind of relationships they have, what are the social norms, and important for this topic, what is the value placed on learning? So an organization can provide motivation and incentives for its employees to learn and provide knowledge. The incentives could be tangible or intangible. And for information sharing, I would say the intangible are most important because people have to want to learn and they have to want to share what they're learning with other people. And this requires a very special environment. It's an environment that's very creative. It's very open, so open to different ideas and open to diversity of people. And it's not the kind of culture where there's finger pointing. Finger pointing is going to kill knowledge because then everyone's afraid to say anything. If you don't say anything, you can't teach people. You can't learn from other people. So probably the most important requirement for knowledge sharing is trust. So when the corporate culture emphasizes openness and trust, you have the opportunities for knowledge management and knowledge sharing. And when you come to a high performance level of knowledge management, then you arrive at a learning organization that has intellectual capital. And remember, all of this is not just the information as objective stuff, it's also the interpersonal dimension. So in projects, we're always talking about high performance teams. Well, one of the features of high performance teams is a high level of knowledge sharing. So we should also talk about high performance knowledge management as an important feature of a project. So let's talk about the different levels that we present information. So starting with the individual level. So this could be the project manager, team members, any other stakeholders. Some of the explicit knowledge are technical project management skills. This is all the information that is in the PMBOK guide. In addition, there are strategic and business management skills that help you work within your organization and your industry. These first two types of explicit knowledge are part of the PMI talent triangle. And the third side of that talent triangle is under the Tacit knowledge column, leadership skills. So PMI does formally recognize the value of both explicit and tacit knowledge. Under tacit knowledge, the other items there are really specific dimensions of leadership. And again, they go from the more concrete to becoming even more abstract and even more tacit. So it's important to realize that tacit knowledge is going to be where you find your vision and optimism that creates that open environment based on trust, and that's going to value learning, including lifelong learning. This also includes the respect and sensitivity towards other stakeholders, other employees, other organizations. And it expands to ethics and cultural sensitivity. These are important themes for PMI, which of course has a code of conduct. So you can see that all of these pieces fit together. We're starting out with them on an individual level. When you start out with them at the individual level, now we're using them to generate interpersonal relationships. And interpersonal relationships create their own kind of knowledge. So now we have team knowledge. So on the explicit side, we have all of the information that you need in order to plan and execute your projects. The requirements, plans, baselines, documents, the deliverables, developing best practices and process improvements. On the tacit side, this is what it feels like to work on a project team. So yes, there's a sense of teamwork, but remember, a lot of the way we can describe this is, oh, it's a sense of, it's not explicit. It's something that you feel and you experience, and it's partly real. It is real, but it's subjective. So what are your relationships with the other people on the team? Is it a creative environment? Is it fun? Is there collaboration? Is there a shared sense of accomplishment? So this is combining all of the team members and coming up with a holistic feel for the project. And it is the big picture of the project and the big picture of all of the knowledge from the project. And then we come to organizational knowledge. So we've been looking at a tree, a little patch of the forest, and now we have the entire forest of knowledge available to the organization and even to combinations of organizations. We could say to the larger community or culture. From a project perspective, the explicit knowledge includes the lessons learned repository and project archives. But they combine into a larger entity, which are the organizational process assets, and then even larger to intellectual property. So intellectual property is everything that can be trademarked and copied have copyrights. This is all your protected knowledge that directly gets translated into monetary value. On the tacit side, we have the organizational culture, that intangible feel of who we are, what we value, how we do things that is unique to every organization, whether it's a startup or a large global corporation. The tacit knowledge is also the reputation and brands of an organization. So again, it's real, but it's intangible. Another part of that is the strategic advantage that the organization has from all of its knowledge. Again, intangible. When you put together all of that tacit knowledge, as well as combining tacit and explicit knowledge, you have intellectual capital. So intellectual property is completely explicit. Intellectual capital leverages the intellectual property by adding tacit knowledge to it. So what is intellectual capital? This is everything that everyone in the organization knows. So it's intangible, and it gives a competitive advantage to the organization. So even though it's intangible, you can approximate it. So if you look at the market valuation of an organization and you subtract the tangible assets, the difference is the intellectual capital or goodwill of the organization. So it does have a value. Remember, it is a real thing. We can estimate its value, but you can't fully quantify it because part of it is subjective and tacit. And again, we can look at 3 levels, and you see that it's consistent with the other frameworks. We have the micro level, the group level, and then the macro level. So we start off at the lowest level, which is human. That is not a value judgment on humans. We're important, and we're an important source of the intellectual property. All of that intellectual property that goes into the copyright and trademarks was created by people. But there are also the tacit dimensions that we've already seen. Structural is starting to combine that information into larger groupings for higher level benefits. So now we're looking at not just a single piece of information, we're looking at databases, we're looking at the patents and trademarks, copyrights, all of the procedures and systems. We're also looking at the corporate culture and the image of an organization. At the relational level, it's even more complex, and in this case, that interpersonal dimension actually becomes more important. So we could say, well, trademarks, we already said they're explicit, but they're relational because they only have value relative to other people and other organizations. Same with licenses and franchises. They're only valuable because they're a means for partnership. And we take that to the higher level, and now we look at all of the relationship management with customers and suppliers and how that results in reputation, goodwill, and importantly, as part of the organization's strategic vision. When you put all of that together at that complex level, and where learning and knowledge in themselves are priorities, then you come to a learning organization. It has 5 characteristics. Just quickly go through them. Systems thinking. So yes, they're individuals, but the individuals interact, and that interaction creates new knowledge. Personal mastery. So even on an individual level, a person can learn more information and expand their own horizons. And this results in personal satisfaction, but it can also have direct benefits for an organization. Okay, mental modes. So these are described as attitudes and assumptions. This is the basic emotional environment for the organization. Is there trust? Is there openness? Is there creativity? Then we add that to a shared vision. So this is the combination of the perspectives of everyone within an organization, and it often is reflected by the senior levels of the organization who have the most power, but they need to communicate that vision to all the levels of the organization. So it has to be embraced by the entire organization, and it also has to reflect long-term goals. The next characteristic is team learning. This is based on collaboration. There has to be teamwork, and there has to be knowledge sharing. And especially, it relies on cross-functional knowledge. So again, you see how closely knowledge management in general is related to project management, because project management also highlights teamwork and cross-functional activities and cross-functional knowledge. So being a learning organization is a good thing, but it has challenges. So first of all, through the continuous information that's gathered, an organization continuously transforms itself. This is challenging. This is challenging in a world where organizations are primarily defined by their balance sheet and their stock price. So that's one challenge. However, if an organization is in a high-risk and high-pressure economic environment, and I think that is actually most organizations now, being a learning organization will give them resilience and a competitive advantage. And this is another place to put in a plug for project management as a vehicle of change, because project management also embraces change management, continuous improvement, and continuing education. So you put all this together, you're going to take a proactive, innovative approach to change. You will be able to start with a long-term vision and shape it in the current environment for the benefit of the organization and its customers. Okay? So this all requires that sense of collaboration and trust. This also is reflected in the organizational structure. So hierarchical organizations, it's hard to be open and share information in a cross-functional way, and also across different levels of employees. So a flat organization lends itself better to knowledge sharing. This can be a challenge, especially for large organizations with many people and many locations in many countries. So after you look at all this, you're finally saying, Well, what is a learning organization? Is it just a myth? I would say it's rare to find a true learning organization. We can look at certain organizations, many in the technology field, I would say are learning organizations. But most of all, it is an ideal that you aim for, something that you want to attain. It's not really possible, but it's an important value. And just by recognizing that value, you're going to realize some of the benefits. So here we are at concluding. So we've already talked about what, how, why. So now we come down to who. So who is the source of the knowledge? Who is developing the knowledge? And who benefits from the knowledge? And again, we're seeing the same three levels. So at the individual level, if you are the project manager, you are responsible for this process, manage project knowledge. And you are responsible for creating an environment where your team finds it easy to collect, create, and disseminate knowledge throughout the project. And finally, you also take advantage of learning opportunities for yourself during the project. Remember, if you are certified as a PMP or any of the other certifications, you need to maintain that. That means you need to continue to learn yourself. You do this through your project experiences and through other explicit techniques such as attending trainings and webinars. Then we bring it to the team level. All the people on the project team, they again are an input and get outputs from this process. So they are all contributing to the creation of knowledge through their work on the project, their activities, their collaboration, and whatever innovations that they can also contribute. And they also get to be on the receiving end, so they take advantage of the project to learn, to enhance their own career development, and gain more knowledge and skills. Then we come to the highest level, the organization. So here we are trying to become a learning organization, and we're trying to generate intellectual capital. So that covers everything fairly quickly about knowledge management. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded, and we will share the link with you so that you can revisit it and spend more time looking at some of the details and thinking about the concepts. In addition, speaking of continuing education, this presentation counts towards 1 PDU if you are PMI certified. And here are the procedures for doing this. I'll come back to the screen. I also just wanted to quickly share with you my personal contact information. This is me, Mimi Rosenfeld. So I am a trainer and course designer for PMO Advisory. You can contact me at PMO Advisory. And this is my LinkedIn profile. I would be happy to connect with any of you, and feel free to contact me if you have more questions. And you can also share your questions with me now through the chat feature. So please let me know if you have any questions about this material. And while we are covering that, I will put the screen on the information for the PDUs. So we still have a few minutes until the official end of the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Well, I hope that you learned from this presentation just as I learned preparing it and also in the course of presenting it. So at the end of this presentation, I'm going to be making my own notes for lessons learned for myself so that I can continue to improve the courses that I give for PMO Advisory. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. And I will stay on straight to the bitter end, and I'll leave this screen up so that you understand how to claim your PDUs. Thank you again for joining us.